Hello and thank you for joining me. I'm Elizabeth Burden, your host for AZ Illustrated Arts. Playwright Bertolt Brecht once said, "Art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it." Tonight, we'll see how some artists in Southern Arizona use their unique perspectives to broaden the debate on some controversial topics. I'll talk with a roundtable of guests about how and why artists choose to address contemporary issues. Meet Favianna Rodriguez, who founded a coalition to inspire political dialogue and change through the connections made by art. Visit the gallery of Steven Derks, a painter and sculptor who says that redemption is the most important theme in his art. And I'll talk to filmmaker Daniel Buckley about why he chose to document the history of mariachi music in Tucson. But first, today's top stories.
A federal appeals court has struck down an Arizona law barring any Medicaid money from abortion providers. In the spring of 2012, the Arizona legislature approved House Bill 2800, barring Medicaid money from medical providers that perform abortions. That law never went into effect because Planned Parenthood filed for an injunction, claiming the law violates the free choice of provider requirement of the Medicaid Act. A federal superior court sided with Planned Parenthood. The state's attorneys appealed, and now the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the lower court's decision. In this latest court opinion, Judge Marcia Berzon sided with Planned Parenthood's claim that the law is a clear violation of the federal requirement in the Medicaid Act. She also noted that the Seventh Circuit Court had set precedent by striking down a similar Indiana law. Judge Berzon also pointed out that Medicaid dollars are already barred from paying for abortions. A national event booking website is putting Tucson on the top 50 list of cities where meetings take place. Tucson had never made it on the list until this year. The Old Pueblo debuted at number 38 for the most popular meeting destination in the United States. Officials with Visit Tucson say that's good for the local economy. Phoenix is in 10th place according to the list, and Orlando, Florida remains the most popular destination for meeting planners. The national event booking website looked at more than 5,500 cities and ranked them based on event booking activity and the number of meeting venues in the area. And that's a look at tonight's headlines.
Beyond the idea of art for art's sake, some artists believe that their purpose is to provoke thought or discussion about a topic and to comment on the current state of affairs. Joining me now to discuss their experience with political art are Ceci Garcia, artist and founding member of the Raices Taller 222 Art Gallery and Workshop, Rand Carlson, a political cartoonist and artist at the Random Arts Studio, and Michael Fenlason, the artistic director of the Beowulf Alley Theatre Company. Thank you all for joining me today. I'd like to start our discussion about political art with asking you how you would define political art. Rand, why don't I start with you?
Well, it's easier for me because I'm a political cartoonist with the Weekly. I see political art as something that advocates something. When you look at it, it editorializes, it makes a statement. If you were a plein air artist or a landscape artist or a still life artist, that doesn't really say anything about anything. So there is where the discussion starts, I think. It advocates something through its perspective or its angle on the topic.
Well, I don't know if I would channel it so narrowly on that, because I do landscape, but usually there's barbed wire as comment to immigration issues. So I believe that it could be wide open. If a good piece of strong political art provokes you into thinking, then it's done its job.
To me, it's about relevance. It doesn't necessarily have to take a point. Sometimes when we do a play, we begin by making the conversation happen, and that's not necessarily something that advocates other than for what the conversation is, although a lot of great art is, about advocacy.
Relevance to whom, though?
Well, for example, we did a show called Word Clouds about the Safeway shooting, and we had survivors there, and what we tried to do was just the responses of the citizens of Tucson. We had gun owners, we had people who were at the shooting, we had in a story format. So we let people respond to that, to respond to their own experience of it. And they came away, in some cases, they came away very politically active, and certainly the survivors had, the Badgers particularly, who saw the show are now very much in the issue of guns and gun control right now.
Rand, you had a recent show that related to the topic of gun and gun violence. How did you come about that particular topic? Why guns?
Well, Americans are obsessed with guns. I mean, and if you look at the newspaper almost every day, I mean, even today's newspaper, there was 5 stories about gun violence. But I was driving to the studio one day, and this whole idea for the show about guns, Love Ray Guns, or United States of America, or One Nation Under Gun, just sort of downloaded into my head. And there it was. And so I really had to do it. I was compelled to do that show. And then lucky for me, a gallery owner approached me and said, let's do it.
My understanding is Raices often does shows that are about topical current events. What are some of the kinds of things that Raices has shown?
Well, I think a prime example is it's called the SB 1070 by the general public exhibition last summer. We rearranged our whole schedule to bring to this part of Arizona a look at what artists were thinking, what they might express concerning the immigration, the SB 1070. It was a look at racism. And we had participants from as far as New York City, Alaska.
Why do a show like that?
As a group of artists in a nonprofit, there's many different perspectives. And it's, we realize that we need to sometimes bring to the public those different perspectives that might not be published or may not be making the news, but definitely are a trigger in our awareness as artists. So why do we drop other exhibitions to bring you a political one that we know pieces will not sell? It's not about the money. It's about the value system of society.
I think artists in our community and communities across the country are the voice. We are the people who can speak for those who are underrepresented in other media outlets, and I'm not speaking of the Weekly. For example, if you look at an organization like Pan Left, I mean, they're a film organization that grabs cameras and goes out when something happens, and they're exemplary in terms of how art meets politics, and they're covering immigration issues and things like that spectacularly well. Or whether we're doing a theater show, a theater play, we did We Won't Pay by Dario Fo, who's an Italian communist. And right down the street was the Occupy Tucson. So we went over in the park and tried to hand out tickets to those guys and tried to make something happen. But artists, I think you might agree, are the voices for the underrepresented and have been time immemorial.
Rand, I wanted to ask you, so you do both fine art and you do the editorial or the cartooning. How does one inform the other, or do they? Are they separate in your mind?
Most of my tin collage work is whimsical, some people might say, or it plays off words. But the political art, like the work that I do for the Weekly, I do it to raise awareness. But I try to do it by raising awareness by humor, I hope, or by irony or some other vehicle like that. You can turn people off with the message. You can preach, and that's really not a good way to get a point across. I try to lure them in, raise awareness of it, and then give them a little bit of a moment.
We're going to do a show called Modern Streetcar the Musical in May, and it's about what's going on downtown, and it's very street level. I hope the mayor comes. I hope he's not mad. But we have to have, that's a way of having that conversation. It's a very silly show. I mean, it's very silly, but it talks about what's been going on downtown and what's happening to businesses, the Ronstadt Center and all that other stuff.
Well, I want to thank the three of you for joining us to talk about political art today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
According to the artist Favianna Rodriguez, politics can be a dry and tedious topic, but it's also something that impacts everyone. Rodriguez is featured in the new independent documentary, Migration is Beautiful, a film that demonstrates how art can be used to engage in the political dialogue that surrounds immigration. Next, Luis Carrion shows us how Favianna Rodriguez and a coalition of artists are engaging in one of the most important political discussions of our time.
I'm Favianna Rodriguez. I'm an artist, an activist, a printmaker, a teacher, and a public speaker.
Favianna Rodriguez is an artist based in Oakland, California. Her work as a graphic artist and printmaker has gotten her noticed, but she says her art is only one facet of who she really is.
I not only consider myself an artist, I'm also a cultural organizer, meaning that I look at how ways art and culture can be used to shift public opinion on issues of national concern.
Rodriguez was featured recently in a film titled Migration is Beautiful, which was produced by the multimedia arts and culture group I Am Other. The film focuses on her art and the role Rodriguez plays in the contentious immigration debate of our times, a role that Rodriguez says she couldn't help but fall into.
Living in California and really, caring about what happens in the country, especially around immigration, I care about that because my parents are migrants. And since I was young, migration has defined my family experience. Everything from Reagan's 1986 law to when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA to when the first anti-immigrant state-based law was introduced in California. I was 16 years old at the time. So I've always understood that the fight for migrant rights was often, there had a lot of racial undertones. The anti-immigrant movement had ways to really paint the face of migrants as being only a Latino face. So as an artist, I really was thinking, well, in a way they're telling a story. They're painting a very particular kind of picture of how they want us to see immigration. And they want us to see us, they would like for people to see it through the frame of criminality.
The narrative that tends to paint migrants as criminals, according to Rodriguez, is one that permeates the media. It's a pervasive story that gets told multiple times at the expense of a productive dialogue.
And in Arizona is where you see it, extremely harsh. And you see how these ideas of people thinking that migrants are criminals, or even of people's fears, really can translate into policy that hurts us all. And so if we're talking about these kinds of how things are framed and where people's ideas come from, people's ideas also come from culture. They come from art, they come from what the films they see, the books they read, the songs they listen to, the art they may see in a museum or on the street. And so I was interested in thinking about, well, what are other artists doing in Arizona, or what are artists doing in the entire Southwest to combat this? And also, how can we as artists create another kind of language to talk about migrants?
Rodriguez says she and other artists formed a collective known as Culture Strike to focus their attention on the developing anti-immigration policies of 2010. The group, in part, was formed as an attempt to try to understand how artists could participate in the national dialogue surrounding immigration.
One of the great things about Culture Strike is that we have formed a network. And by forming a network, we take the very first step, which is communicating with each other, supporting each other, trying to get visibility for the work that we do.
Rodriguez says she and other Culture Strike members hope to help Tucson artists, writers, and musicians find ways to engage in politics. This is something that she says is important regardless of where people live.
It's important to first note that as artists, we don't think we're from a particular state, or we don't even necessarily identify as being from a particular country. I think the thing that unifies us is that we're creative people, and we're looking at the art that's done here or around the world. And I think that we have something that binds us all, which is that we want to create beautiful things, and we want people to be inspired by that.
You can find more information on Culture Strike, the film Migration is Beautiful, and the work that is being done to create an inclusive dialogue about immigration by logging on to our website at azpm.org.
President Obama announced sweeping changes which could make college more affordable and accountable.
At the core of the president's plan, a rating system to see which colleges teach well while holding down costs. We get the details and ask if it's the right way to go.
Then U.S. intelligence weighs evidence of a possible poison gas attack that may have killed hundreds outside Damascus. Margaret Warner looks at whether outrage over this incident should compel the West to act.
A fresh series of secret tapes reveals former President Nixon's attempts to control the Watergate scandal. We hear excerpts and discuss what they tell us.
And we look at the personalities driving the politics and gridlock in Washington with two authors and veteran political journalists, Robert Draper and Mark Leibovich.
You do wonder, when people are in office, when people are in power, who are they really working for? Are they in it to actually work to serve the public good, or are they in it for self-service?
That's all ahead on tonight's NewsHour.
Charities often don't give cash directly to those in need because they're worried about how they'll spend it. When our Planet Money team found a group in Kenya that was doing it, they went to see what was being accomplished, aside from spreading good cheer.
I was just very happy. I was very happy about the money.
Handing out cash on the next morning edition from NPR News.
Earlier in our roundtable discussion, we heard about the choice that some artists must make between producing art that expresses their politics and producing art that sells. Artist and gallery owner Steven Derks confronted that choice, guided by the emotions he felt in the aftermath of recent events of gun violence. We'll find out what he decided to do next in this open studio visit.
My name is Steven Derks, and I refer to myself as an artist, and I usually get a question, well, what does that mean? And I respond with that I primarily do steel sculpture and I do modern painting, and most people accept that. They're equally satisfying. Now, after I've been doing one for a while, I start to hunger to do the other thing. I heard that Carl Jung said once that the reason why artists make art is that they're fragmented and they want to become whole. And possibly the circle does that for me. Redemption is a big part of my own personal mythology. I view myself as someone who had fallen apart at a certain basic level and rebuilt myself with the help of my community. It is expressed through the art that I do. And that expression is that I find an object that has been discarded, that's decayed and is no longer usable, and I reuse it, thus redeeming it. The more I do that, the more it reinforces my own personal redemption in life. It finds its way into all of my work. I'm comfortable with steel. I really relate to the material itself, more so than, say, wood. I try not to cut and bend too much. There were times that I had those self-imposed limitations purposefully set so that it forced me to just assemble. And the essence behind the work was just how this piece relates to this piece. So we have the house, the monarchy, and how they relate. It's a slippery slope for me. If I start correcting things and finishing things and making it more and more polished, there's no end to it. So for me, acceptance oftentimes is just accepting things as they are. So I see this object, I put it in my work, and I don't obsess about making it perfect. I always think of, do you know Basquiat's work? He put crowns in a lot of his pieces. After Newtown happened, I think everyone in this country was wounded at a certain level, whether they wanted to admit it or not. And there was a fundamental shift. And for me, that fundamental shift happened in my studio while I was working. I was crafting hearts for Valentine's Day, and I couldn't resist not interpreting what had happened in those events. My resistance was that that it's really hard to sell artwork that has guns in it and has a dark side to it, and that people don't gravitate to that. And, you know, let it be damned, I just decided I have to. This just sort of happened. Maybe it was, maybe it just needed one more event to push it over the top. Maybe the fact that I was just working with hearts and I was thinking in those terms, that it obliged me to look at what I was unwilling to look at. But ultimately, I'm grateful for that. When I started painting, for instance, I thought, can this sustain me? Can I just lay down color day after day and feel like I'm happy about that? And I still can. I mean, I painted some paintings a couple weeks ago, and it's exhilarating. I love seeing color and seeing what happens. But there's more to my artistic interest than that. And I don't have to choose between the two. I can do both. I think with each piece that I make, a little bit of reconciliation occurs. Hoping that I'm keeping the conversation going, particularly with the gun issue. Historically, what happens is that we get outraged and then we forget. My duty as an artist is to keep the conversation at the forefront, and that's what I intend to do with this work. You know, there's a lot of wounded people out there, and I would like people to recognize that it isn't a permanent state, that people can heal. I started out as an artist doing political pieces, and then I moved into just beauty, just color. Coming back to it makes me feel whole as an artist. Coming back to it makes it feel like I can use my art to leverage change.
Steven Derks says that the public response to his art inspired by gun violence has actually been far more positive than he had anticipated.
Mariachi is just as valid a musical experience as anything else. They had to audition for the performing group, and part of that audition process was they had to have good grades. Athletics required at the time a 2.5 GPA. I required a 3.0 GPA to be part of the Mariachi Aslan, because mariachi is just a vehicle to get you to college.
Mariachi music has helped me a lot in a way with the person I am now. I used to kind of slack on my classes, but mariachi kind of like helped me to improve on myself and to try to do better things.
That was a short excerpt from a film currently in production called Mariachis Transform Tucson. Here to tell us more about it is documentary filmmaker and music writer Daniel Buckley. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
So why did you want to tell this story?
It was compelling. I worked for the Tucson Citizen for 22 years, and I had been covering mariachis as part of being a music writer before that. And all along the way, there were these wonderful stories from people about how lives were being changed. When I joined the U of A in 1971, when I came to school, there were far more Latino kids working in the cafeteria and watering the lawns than there were in the classes with me. And I thought that was strange. And one of the few people that I knew who was in school at the time was Randy Carrillo, who was here with a scholarship from the first youth mariachi in America, Los Changuitos Feos. And that set the precedent. And they charged for their performances, they invested the money, and they sent all their graduates to college.
So give us a synopsis of what the documentary is about.
Well, it's kind of about that. It's about how our city changed in roughly 50 years, from the time that next year is the 50th birthday of the Changuitos Feos. And in that 50 years, we went from the city being involved in what they called urban renewal and tearing down almost everything to do with Mexican culture in Tucson, to now when you cannot have a celebration of Tucson without mariachis and folclóricos. I think that they have been incredibly great ambassadors for the culture, but more than that, what mariachi discipline has taught them, or what being part of mariachis has taught them, is teamwork, discipline, being able to get up in front of people and speak your mind. These are the leadership skills that culture will need in the future.
So that makes it really apparent that this is about much more than music. So what else do you think is a part of there? Is it a social movement, an educational movement, something else?
It's all of the above. It's a social movement, it's a political movement. In San Jose, for example, when they have their mariachi festival, they also have a night that's dedicated to talking about issues of Latino culture, because the community is there. And you have everybody from ordinary people to experts. And why not, while we're all in the room, talk about the elephant in the room and see what we can do to move forward.
Speaking of community, how has the community here in Tucson been engaged in the making of this film?
Well, I got a grant from the Tucson Pima Arts Council, one of the place grants. But you know, the real input has been through social media, through Facebook, through LinkedIn, through Twitter, and so forth. People are stepping up to tell me, you got to talk to this person, you got to talk to that person. This person was there at the beginning, which is just fantastic, and I love that. And also, the community really stepped up when I put together the Kickstarter campaign to provide seed money.
Well, it seems to me that there was a lot that you may have known. My understanding was that you were inducted into the Mariachi Hall of Fame. How did that come about?
Well, probably more than any other writer in the United States. I have written about mariachis and been involved in it, and talking larger picture, not just about how this is really a world-class art form. You know, the mariachi that you see, the show mariachis, are a chamber opera company. They have very highly trained voices. They are virtuosos. But there's also that component of how, at the workshops of the mariachi conferences around the United States, people get to rub shoulders with the greatest players in all of mariachi music. It's like if you were a kid in the 60s and you got to go and workshop with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones for the summer. That's how these workshops are. And how exciting it is to be with the greatest in what you do, learning directly from them, understanding the style. A couple of years ago when I was in San Jose, there was a group from Harvard, Mariachi Veritas, and they were incredible virtuosos, mostly Asian kids and Anglos, but they needed help with the style, and that's what was going on at the conference. Was they were really teaching them what the music meant and how it shaped, and that's fantastic.
That's our show for tonight. To post a comment on any of these stories or to keep up with the latest news, visit our website, azpm.org. I'm Elizabeth Burden, and thank you for watching.